The outcome was not disputed. Those present agreed on that much. A professional sumo wrestler, measured at over 6 feet and weighing more than 400 pounds, had entered the exchange convinced there was nothing to discover. He had said it plainly: too small, too light, not built for this kind of contest. The setting was informal, the moment unannounced, and the audience limited to men who understood physical hierarchy for a living. 10 seconds later, the floor settled the argument. No prolonged struggle followed, no raised voices, no attempt to explain what had happened. The sumo wrestler remained where he had fallen, face down, while the smaller man stepped back and waited. What mattered was not the fall itself, but the silence that followed it, because no one present could clearly describe how such a result had occurred so quickly. That uncertainty would linger far longer than the moment itself. Tokyo's professional training halls in the late 1960s were not places of spectacle. They were controlled environments shaped by repetition and hierarchy, where movement followed tradition and rank was established through years of visible endurance. In sumo culture especially, the body itself served as proof. Size was not merely an advantage, it was the record of discipline made visible. Mass represented hours of training, regulated diet, and the acceptance of a system that rewarded those who could occupy space without yielding it. Within this context, physical proportion carried an authority that rarely needed to be questioned. When a wrestler entered a room, the room adjusted, footsteps slowed, conversations softened. There was an unspoken agreement that force, if required, would belong to the larger body. This was not arrogance so much as habit. In such settings, hierarchy was not announced, it was understood. The training facility where this encounter took place reflected that understanding. Mats were clean, worn evenly from years of controlled impact. Observers, coaches, practitioners, visitors stood with the relaxed posture of men who had seen bodies collide often enough to lose interest in prediction. Nothing about the day suggested disruption. There was no scheduled challenge, no formal invitation, no audience assembled for instruction. What mattered most before anything occurred was the assumption shared by everyone present, that size would define the limits of possibility. The sumo wrestler at the center of the moment was not a marginal figure. His measurements were public knowledge: 6 feet 2 inches, over 400 pounds. His balance was trained to resist sudden force, his stance designed to absorb impact without retreat. He carried himself with the calm of someone accustomed to compliance, not because he demanded it, but because resistance rarely made sense. In environments like this, comparisons were unnecessary. Smaller men did not challenge larger ones unless ceremony required it. When they did, the outcome was expected to follow a familiar pattern: pressure applied, ground conceded, lesson learned. This is important to understand, because nothing that followed was framed as defiance. There was no intent to prove a philosophy or overturn a tradition. The encounter emerged from proximity, not provocation. A few words exchanged casually, an observation about build, a remark that did not carry insult, only certainty: too small, too light, not constructed for what was understood to be real strength. No one interrupted the assessment, no one corrected it. Bruce Lee did not respond immediately. He did not alter his posture or adjust his stance to match the room's expectations. He remained still, attentive, as though listening to information rather than receiving judgment. Those watching later recalled this detail with precision, not because it was dramatic, but because it contradicted what they were trained to notice. In a culture where size spoke first, silence was unusual. And yet, at that moment, silence governed the space more completely than authority ever had. The sumo wrestler did not view the situation as an encounter. To him, it was an alignment of facts. Years of structured training had conditioned him to read bodies quickly and accurately. Weight distribution, shoulder width, center of gravity, these were not abstractions but measurements learned through contact. When he assessed someone, it was not personal, it was procedural. From his perspective, Bruce Lee represented a familiar category: light frame, narrow base, musculature defined but not built to anchor force. In the sumo world, such bodies existed on the periphery as trainers, assistants, or visitors from other disciplines whose techniques relied on speed rather than control. They were respected for their precision but not mistaken for resistance. The remark "too small" was delivered without hostility. Witnesses later emphasized this point. There was no mockery in his tone, no raised voice. It was spoken as one might comment on weather conditions or mat quality, a statement of environment, not intention. This certainty shaped everything that followed. He did not stretch, he did not lower his stance, he did not prepare for opposition. His posture remained casual, weight settled evenly, feet placed with the quiet confidence of someone who expected no challenge. In sumo, preparation signals acknowledgement. To prepare is to concede the possibility of effort. None was offered. Those present read this as closure. The assessment had been made, the hierarchy reaffirmed. If the exchange ended there, it would not have been remembered at all. Bruce Lee, however, did not counter with explanation. He did not cite technique, lineage, or experience. He did not respond verbally to the assumption. Instead, he made a small request, one that did not escalate the situation but reframed it. Not a challenge, not a proposal. Simply an invitation to feel something directly rather than describe it. This was the first point at which the room's rhythm changed. The sumo wrestler agreed, not because he felt compelled, but because refusal would have suggested uncertainty. In his world, demonstration was unnecessary when dominance was obvious, but granting a moment cost nothing. It was a courtesy extended downward, not sideways. Observers later described this decision as automatic. There was no sense of risk attached to it. The disparity in size made the outcome feel predetermined. Whatever followed would confirm what was already known. That confidence, unexamined and unguarded, was not arrogance. It was the product of a system that had never required doubt. And it was precisely that certainty that left no margin when the moment arrived. Bruce Lee did not step forward in the manner of a challenger. There was no shift in stance meant to signal confrontation, no tightening of posture to announce intent. Those watching noticed something quieter, the way he positioned himself in relation to space, not squared off, not retreating, simply aligned. His body language did not ask for attention, yet it drew it. In training environments, experienced observers learn to read small details, the way weight settles, how breath is managed, whether movement originates from tension or balance. In that moment, several noticed that Lee's stillness was not passive. It was controlled, as though motion were being withheld rather than absent. He stood close enough to remove distance, but not so close as to threaten. This, too, was noted later. Distance communicates intention, too far suggests hesitation, too close signals aggression. Lee occupied neither. The sumo wrestler, by contrast, remained unchanged. His posture did not adapt to the shift in atmosphere. He continued to stand as one stands when expecting explanation rather than action. This asymmetry, one body adjusting invisibly, the other remaining fixed, created a subtle imbalance that few recognized at the time. No formal start was announced. There were no instructions given to observers, no rules outlined. This was not a match, and everyone understood that instinctively. The absence of structure placed the moment outside familiar frameworks. It would not be judged by points, endurance, or spectacle. Whatever occurred would have to justify itself immediately. Bruce Lee's gaze did not lock onto his counterpart in a confrontational way. Witnesses recalled that he seemed to be observing rather than targeting, as though assessing variables rather than preparing to overcome an obstacle. This, again, ran counter to expectation. Smaller men, when facing larger ones, often reveal urgency through their eyes. Lee did not. What followed happened without visible preparation. No dramatic intake of breath, no shift in footing that could be tracked. Those closest later admitted they could not recall the exact sequence of movement, not because it was fast in a theatrical sense, but because it was economical. Nothing extra occurred that could be isolated or named. One moment both men were upright, balanced, unremarkable. The next, the sumo wrestler was no longer controlling his own center. This transition between stability and loss did not register as violence. There was no sense of impact traveling outward. Instead, it appeared as a collapse of structure from within, as though something fundamental had been removed without force. The room responded not with noise, but with delay. Several seconds passed before anyone moved, not because they were stunned in the dramatic sense, but because the result did not align with their internal timelines. Their expectations had no place to land. Bruce Lee stepped back immediately. He did not maintain contact. He did not follow the fall. He created space again, returning the environment to neutrality. The sumo wrestler remained face down, unmoving not from injury but from recalibration. The certainty that had governed the moment before was no longer available to him. And in that absence, the room finally became aware of what had changed. Those who later tried to describe the moment struggled with language. They did not lack vocabulary but reference. What occurred did not fit the patterns they were accustomed to using. It had not unfolded as a struggle nor as an exchange of force. There was no sequence of attacks to recount, no escalation to chart. Most agreed on what it was not. It was not a throw in the traditional sense. The sumo wrestler's balance had not been broken by leverage applied over time. There was no visible lifting of mass, no effortful redirection. Neither was it a strike as commonly understood. No sharp sound followed. No recoil was observed. The body did not react as one does when absorbing impact. Instead, witnesses described a brief moment of contact, followed by absence. One observer later said that it felt as though the larger man had stepped into a space that was no longer there. Another recalled the sensation of watching something complete itself before he could recognize it had begun. These accounts varied in phrasing, but not in conclusion. Whatever had occurred had been finished before interpretation could start. This is why those present did not speak immediately. In training environments, commentary usually follows action. Corrections are offered, techniques are named, even surprise invites analysis. Here, no one felt equipped to do that. The demonstration had not announced itself as instruction, and so instruction did not follow. Bruce Lee offered none. He did not explain what he had done or why it worked. He did not turn to the observers or the fallen man. He simply waited, hands relaxed, posture neutral. This restraint mattered. Had he spoken, the moment might have shifted into debate or defense. Silence preserved its clarity. The sumo wrestler eventually rose on his own. There was no visible anger in his movement, but there was caution. His posture was altered, not weakened, but recalibrated. The confidence with which he had occupied space earlier had been replaced by attentiveness. He looked at Lee again, this time without commentary. No rematch was suggested. In other contexts, such an outcome might have provoked escalation. Size challenged often seeks reaffirmation. Here, that instinct did not surface. The demonstration had not humiliated, it had instructed. It had removed something quietly rather than taking it forcefully. Observers later noted that this absence of follow-up was as significant as the fall itself. Had the exchange continued, it might have been reframed as competition. Ending it immediately preserved its nature as a reference point rather than a contest. The room slowly returned to motion. Conversations resumed, but at a different volume. Some spoke about unrelated matters as though grounding themselves in routine. Others remained silent, watching Lee with a new kind of attention, not curiosity but reassessment. What had been demonstrated was not superiority but irrelevance. Size, strength, and preparation had not been defeated, they had simply not been engaged on their own terms. That realization did not arrive all at once. It began as discomfort, then uncertainty, and finally recognition that something fundamental had shifted, even if no one could yet articulate what it was. The lesson was not delivered verbally. It lingered in the space left behind by explanation. And it would not remain contained to that room. In the minutes that followed, the physical event receded quickly. What remained was not the image of a man on the floor, but the disturbance of an internal order. For those present, especially those trained to evaluate encounters through measurable factors, the demonstration introduced a problem that could not be solved immediately. The sumo wrestler did not speak about the moment. This restraint was noticed. In disciplines built on hierarchy, silence after an unexpected outcome carries meaning. It suggests processing rather than denial. He resumed movement slowly, with attention to placement and balance, as though recalibrating his relationship to space itself. The body that had once asserted certainty now moved with inquiry. Others in the room experienced a similar shift. Several witnesses later admitted that they replayed the moment repeatedly in their minds, attempting to locate the missing step, the instant where expectation should have aligned with reality. They searched for effort where none had been visible, for force where none had been displayed. Each attempt returned the same result, the absence of anything to isolate. This absence was unsettling. Strength, as they understood it, relied on visible exertion. Mastery announced itself through repetition, endurance, and dominance over resistance. What they had seen did not reject these principles outright, but it bypassed them. The larger body had not been overcome, it had been rendered temporarily irrelevant. That distinction mattered deeply. No one left the room declaring allegiance to a new method or philosophy. There was no sudden conversion, no rush to reinterpret training systems. Instead, doubt entered quietly. A small but persistent question took hold, one that did not demand answers immediately but refused to disappear. What if efficiency did not scale with size? What if preparation could be rendered incomplete by timing rather than power? What if control did not require struggle to assert itself? These questions did not circulate openly. They surfaced privately during later training sessions in moments of pause between drills. Coaches corrected postures more carefully. Practitioners paid closer attention to balance rather than force. Some began to observe smaller movements with greater respect. The sumo wrestler, for his part, did not seek explanation from Bruce Lee. This, too, was significant. In many systems, knowledge is demanded after disruption. Here, it was earned through observation rather than inquiry. He had been shown something, and he treated it as such, not as a loss to be reclaimed, but as information to be absorbed. The psychological impact did not manifest as fear or humiliation. It appeared as humility, though not the performative kind. It was a recalibration of certainty. In the days that followed, the incident was mentioned sparingly. When it was referenced, it was done without embellishment. 10 seconds, no contest, no explanation. Each retelling stripped the moment further of drama, leaving only its core, a result that resisted easy categorization. That resistance is what allowed the story to persist. It did not spread because it was impressive. It spread because it was unresolved. Years later, the incident was no longer tied to a specific room or afternoon. It had separated itself from its setting and become a reference, mentioned in passing, recalled without urgency, preserved through careful retelling rather than repetition. Those who spoke of it rarely did so at length. They assumed, often correctly, that the listener would either understand its significance or dismiss it entirely. That selectivity shaped the story's survival. It did not circulate as proof of dominance or as evidence of rivalry. It was never positioned as a victory over sumo, nor as a challenge to its traditions. In fact, many retellings omitted the sumo wrestler's name altogether, focusing instead on the conditions, the size difference, the confidence, the absence of contest. The anonymity preserved the lesson by removing personal stakes. As Bruce Lee's reputation grew, the story did not expand with it. This restraint distinguished it from other accounts that accumulated detail with each retelling. Here, the opposite occurred. Descriptions became shorter, language grew more careful, what could not be confirmed was not added. This discipline mirrored the nature of the event itself. Those who had witnessed it often spoke of it years later only when discussions turned to limits, of strength, of certainty, of systems that assume continuity where none is guaranteed. The incident functioned as a quiet interruption in such conversations. It did not conclude them, it redirected them. By the time Bruce Lee's teaching methods began influencing training beyond their original circles, the story had already done its work. It had prepared certain minds to receive ideas without resistance. Concepts like efficiency, adaptability, and timing did not arrive as abstractions. They arrived as answers to a question that had been introduced without explanation years earlier. The sumo wrestler, when asked about the moment long afterward, reportedly offered little detail. He did not dispute the account, nor did he elaborate on it. He treated it as one treats a clear demonstration, something observed, absorbed, and no longer debated. That response reinforced the story's tone. It was not a grievance. It was not a mystery to be solved. It was a reference point. Over time, the incident acquired a particular kind of weight, not because it was dramatic, but because it resisted distortion. It did not invite reenactment. It did not lend itself to spectacle. It remained anchored to its original qualities: brevity, clarity, and silence. In this way, it became part of Bruce Lee's legacy without being claimed by it. The lesson embedded in the moment was never announced. It required no conclusion. Those who encountered the story were left with a choice: to pursue strength as accumulation or to consider mastery as reduction. Some ignored it, others carried it quietly into their own practice. That quiet transmission is why the story endured. Not because a larger man fell in 10 seconds, but because, in that brief interval, certainty yielded without resistance, and no one present forgot the sound of the room afterward.